Sometimes love arrives when you least expect it, wearing the face of a stranger and carrying promises that seem too wild to believe. Sometimes love arrives when you most need it, disguised as salvation and wrapped in the weathered hands of someone who's learned that the heart grows stronger, not weaker, with age. In 1887, in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming Territory, Ezra Blackwood stood 6 feet 8 inches tall, his shoulders broad as a barn door and his hands scarred from 30 years of working iron and wood. At 52, his black hair was streaked with silver, his green eyes held depths that spoke of loss and redemption. And when he walked into Clearwater's only general store that October morning, every conversation stopped. Martha Henley, 78 years old and recently widowed after 60 years of marriage, sat behind the store counter with her ledger book open, her silver hair pinned in a neat bun, her brown eyes sharp as a hawk's despite her age. She'd buried her husband Samuel just 2 months prior, and the vultures were already circling, creditors, land grabbers, and her own nephew who'd made it clear he thought she belonged in a rest home back east. Ezra removed his hat and approached the counter. "Mrs. Henley, I've come to make you an offer that might sound like madness, but I'm hoping you'll hear me out." "Mr. Blackwood, isn't it?" Martha's voice carried the authority of decades. "I heard you bought the old Whitmore place up on Skull Ridge. Folks say that land is cursed, that no woman has ever lasted more than a year up there. That's precisely why I need your help, ma'am." His voice was deep, gentle despite his imposing size. "I'm proposing marriage. Not for love, though I respect you greatly, but for survival. You need protection from those who'd steal your land, and I need a woman strong enough to help me break whatever curse hangs over that ridge." But could an arrangement born of desperation truly transform into something neither of them had dared hope for again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The store fell silent except for the tick of the old clock on the wall. Martha studied this mountain of a man who'd just proposed the most audacious arrangement she'd heard in 7 decades of living. "You realize, Mr. Blackwood, that I'm old enough to be your mother? Age is just numbers, Mrs. Henley. What I need is a partner with backbone, someone who won't flee at the first sign of trouble. From what I've observed, you've got more steel in you than women half your age." Martha had heard the stories about Skull Ridge. 3 wives had lived there over the past 15 years. All had died under mysterious circumstances. Accidents, the reports claimed. A fall down the stairs. A horse that spooked and trampled its rider. A fever that came on sudden and fierce. The superstitious folks in town whispered about ancient Indian burial grounds and vengeful spirits. "What makes you think I won't meet the same fate as your predecessors?" she asked, her fingers drumming against the counter. "Because you're not their wives, you're Martha Henley. You've survived droughts, blizzards, childbirth, and the death of loved ones. You've run a business and raised 4 children. You've got something those other women lacked. And what's that? Pure stubborn determination." Despite herself, Martha felt a smile tugging at her lips. It was true. Samuel used to say she was too ornery to die easy. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood?" Ezra placed his hat on the counter and leaned forward slightly. "A business arrangement, ma'am. You come live at the ranch as my wife. I'll protect your property here in town. Make sure your nephew can't force you out or sell what's rightfully yours. In exchange, you help me turn that ranch into something sustainable. I've got ideas, furniture making, maybe breeding horses. But I need someone with business sense. And if this supposed curse proves real, then we face it together. 2 stubborn souls are harder to kill than one." Martha closed her ledger book with a decisive snap. She'd lived 78 years without taking the safe path, and she wasn't about to start now. "I'll need to see this cursed ranch of yours before I give you an answer." "Fair enough. Can you ride?" Martha snorted. "I was riding horses before you were born, young man." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost painting the windows of Martha's small apartment above the store. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with the implications of Ezra's proposal. When she looked out her window, she saw him waiting beside 2 horses, a massive black stallion that suited his frame, and a gentle-looking chestnut mare with kind eyes. Martha had dressed in her most practical clothing, a dark wool skirt that would allow her to ride side-saddle, a white blouse buttoned to the throat, and her late husband's leather jacket. She braided her silver hair and pinned it up securely, then added her father's old felt hat, the one she wore when she meant business. "Good morning, Mrs. Henley," Ezra called as she emerged from the store. "I brought Rosie for you. She's gentle but smart, won't spook easy." As Martha approached the mare, the horse nickered softly and nuzzled her shoulder. She ran her hand along Rosie's neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath the winter coat. "Hello, beautiful girl," she murmured, and the horse seemed to respond to her calm confidence. Ezra helped her mount, his hands steady and respectful. Once she was settled, he swung up onto his stallion with surprising grace for such a large man. The ride to Skull Ridge took them through some of the most beautiful country Martha had ever seen. They followed a winding trail that climbed gradually through stands of pine and aspen, their horses' hooves crunching through fallen leaves painted gold and red by the season. The air was thin and clean, carrying the scent of pine sap and the promise of winter snow. "Tell me about the other women," Martha said as they rode. "The ones who supposedly couldn't survive your ranch." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. "First was Elizabeth Morrison. She was 22, married me for my money after her father's debts caught up to him. Lasted 8 months before she fell down the front stairs and broke her neck. Accident. That's what the sheriff ruled. But Elizabeth was city-born, never took to frontier life. She was miserable from the day she arrived, drinking laudanum for her nerves, barely eating. I think she was careless because she didn't care about staying alive." They rode past a small creek, the water running clear over smooth stones. Martha noticed how carefully Ezra guided his horse, how he automatically checked to ensure she was keeping up. The second was Lucy Walsh, a widow from Denver. Lasted 6 months before her horse threw her into a ravine. Sheriff said the saddle girth had snapped, old leather, probably rotted through. And the third? Sarah Jane Porter. She was tough, I'll give her that. Lasted almost a year. Came down with a fever during the spring thaw, died within 3 days. Doc said it was pneumonia, but Sarah Jane had survived worse. She'd nursed her whole family through cholera back in Kansas. Martha absorbed this information, her practical mind working through the details. 3 deaths, all different causes, all within a short time of living on the ranch. Either it was a remarkable string of coincidences, or something else was at work. "Did you love any of them?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Ezra's hands tightened on his reins. "I tried to. They were good women, deserved better than what they got. But love, real love takes time to grow. None of them lived long enough for that." They crested a ridge, and Martha got her first look at Skull Ridge Ranch. The view took her breath away. The main house sat in a natural meadow surrounded by towering pines, with the Bighorn Mountains rising majestically behind it. A barn and several outbuildings dotted the landscape, and she could see the glint of water from what must be a stream or pond. But as they rode closer, Martha began to notice the signs of neglect and misfortune. The fence rails were broken in places. The barn door hung askew on its hinges. Weeds had grown up around the buildings, and some of the windows in the house were boarded up. "It's beautiful land," she said honestly. "But it needs work." "That it does. I've been maintaining the basics, keeping the roof sound, the well clean, the livestock fed. But it needs a woman's touch, someone who can see the potential and isn't afraid to fight for it." They dismounted in front of the house, and Martha got her first close look at what would potentially become her home. The structure was solid, built of hewn logs chinked with mud and stone, with a wide front porch and real glass windows. The infamous front stairs that had claimed Elizabeth Morrison's life were broad wooden steps leading up to the porch, currently in need of repair. "Let me show you inside," Ezra said, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness. The interior of the house was spacious but sparse. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture that Ezra had clearly made himself, and shelves lined with books. More books than Martha had expected to find in a bachelor's home. The kitchen was well equipped with a cast-iron stove, sturdy wooden counters, and cabinets that showed fine craftsmanship. "You built this furniture yourself?" Martha asked, running her hand along a beautifully carved chair back. "Yes, ma'am. It's what I do best, working with wood. Been thinking I could build pieces to sell in town, maybe even ship to Denver if the quality's good enough." Martha examined the workmanship more closely. The joinery was expert, the design both functional and elegant. This wasn't the rough carpentry of a typical rancher. This was the work of a true craftsman. These are beautiful, Ezra. You could command good prices for work like this. She noticed how his face lit up at her praise, and something warm stirred in her chest. When was the last time she'd seen a man so pleased by her approval? They toured the rest of the house. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a small study lined with more books, and a root cellar stocked with preserves and winter supplies. Everything was clean but utilitarian, lacking the touches that made a house a home. The bedroom at the front would be yours, Ezra said, his cheeks coloring slightly. It has the best view and gets morning light. I'd take the room at the back. Martha nodded, appreciating his assumption that their marriage would be one of companionship rather than romance. At her age, she'd expected nothing else. They walked out to examine the outbuildings. The barn needed some repair work, but the structure was sound. Ezra kept 2 milk cows, a small flock of chickens, and several horses in addition to the ones they'd ridden. A large garden plot showed signs of a recent harvest, though weeds were already taking over. I'm not much of a gardener, Ezra admitted. Elizabeth tried to keep one going, but her heart wasn't in it. Lucy was afraid of the chickens. Sarah Jane had the best luck, but she got sick before she could preserve much for winter. Martha walked through the overgrown garden, her experienced eye seeing the potential. The soil looked rich, and the location got good sun while being protected from the worst winds. With proper planning, this could feed a family and provide surplus to sell in town. This could be productive, she said. The growing season's short this high up, but there are crops that do well in mountain conditions. They spent the afternoon examining every aspect of the ranch. Ezra showed her the workshop where he crafted his furniture, a well-organized space filled with quality tools and the sweet smell of wood shavings. Martha ran her fingers along the smooth surface of a half-finished table, imagining the skill required to create such beauty from raw timber. You have a gift, she said simply. As the sun began to set, they sat on the front porch, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Martha felt a peace she hadn't experienced since Samuel's death, a sense that perhaps this crazy proposal might actually work. I have conditions, she said finally. Ezra straightened. Name them. First, I keep my store in town. I'll arrange for someone to run it day to day, but it remains mine. That's my security. Agreed. Second, this may be a marriage of convenience, but it will be a real marriage. I won't have folks thinking I'm just your housekeeper. We'll share meals, attend church together, present ourselves as husband and wife. Understood. Third, if we're going to make this ranch profitable, we do it as partners. I want a say in the business decisions. Ezra smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Mrs. Henley, I was hoping you'd insist on that. Martha stood up, decision made. Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Blackwood. When do you want to have the ceremony? As soon as possible. Your nephew's been sniffing around your property, and word is the bank's getting pressure to foreclose on some of the smaller businesses in town. This Saturday, then. I'll speak to Reverend Matthews tomorrow. As they prepared to ride back to town, Martha took one last look around the ranch. The curse might be real, or it might be coincidence and bad luck. Either way, she'd faced down plenty of challenges in her 78 years. What was one more? But as they mounted their horses and headed down the mountain trail, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them from the dark line of trees. She turned in her saddle to look back, but saw nothing except shadows and the pale gleam of moonlight on the cabin windows. Everything all right? Ezra asked, noticing her backward glance. Just getting my bearings, Martha replied. But privately, she wondered if the curse of Skull Ridge was more than just superstition. Saturday dawned gray and blustery, with snow clouds gathering over the mountains. Martha stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep blue wool with tiny pearl buttons that Samuel had bought for her 10th wedding anniversary, 40 years ago. It still fit well, though she'd had to let out the waist slightly over the years. She'd spent the week making arrangements. Her neighbor's daughter, Emma Cole, would run the store 6 days a week in exchange for room and board in Martha's apartment and a small salary. The girl was quick with numbers and had a good head for business. She'd do well. Martha's belongings were packed in 2 leather trunks and several wooden crates. 78 years of life boiled down to practical necessities: clothes, a few precious books, Samuel's tools, her mother's china, and the quilt she'd made for her wedding bed all those decades ago. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. She opened it to find Ezra standing in the hallway, hat in hand, wearing a black suit that made him look even more imposing than usual. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his silver-streaked hair, transforming himself from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. "You look beautiful, Martha," he said quietly, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. It had been years since a man had called her beautiful. "You clean up well yourself, Ezra." The wedding ceremony was simple, held in the small Methodist church with only a handful of witnesses. Emma Cole, the blacksmith, and his wife, and old Doc Harrison, who delivered half the babies in Clearwater. Reverend Matthews kept the service brief, perhaps sensing that this was more business arrangement than romantic union. But when Ezra took Martha's weathered hand in his massive ones and spoke the traditional vows, his voice was steady and sincere. And when Martha promised to love, honor, and cherish this virtual stranger, she found herself meaning every word more than she'd expected. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Matthews announced. Ezra hesitated for just a moment, then leaned down to brush his lips gently against Martha's forehead, a gesture both respectful and surprisingly tender. As they walked out of the church as husband and wife, Martha noticed her nephew Harold lurking across the street, his face dark with anger. He'd expected to inherit her property, and this marriage had ruined his plans. She'd have to watch out for him. The reception was held in the church hall, nothing fancy, just coffee and cake that Emma had baked. But the warmth of the small community made it feel festive despite the circumstances. Even those who'd whispered about the cursed ranch seemed genuinely happy for the unlikely couple. "You sure about this, Martha?" Doc Harrison asked quietly as she cut the cake. "Skull Ridge has claimed 3 women already." "Those women weren't me, Doc," Martha replied with characteristic bluntness. "I've survived 78 years of everything this world could throw at me. I'm not about to let some supposed curse scare me now." As afternoon faded into evening, Ezra loaded Martha's belongings into his wagon. The snow had started falling, fat, lazy flakes that would make the mountain roads treacherous if they didn't leave soon. "Ready, Mrs. Blackwood?" Ezra asked, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. Mrs. Blackwood. Martha felt a little thrill at hearing her new name. She'd been Mrs. Henley for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to begin a new chapter. The ride up to Skull Ridge was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The falling snow muffled sound, creating an intimate cocoon around the wagon. Martha found herself studying her new husband's profile. The strong jaw, the laugh lines around his eyes, the capable hands holding the reins. "Having second thoughts?" Ezra asked, noticing her scrutiny. "No," Martha said honestly. "Just wondering what we've gotten ourselves into. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The ranch looked different under its blanket of snow, softer, more welcoming. Warm light glowed from the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney. Ezra had obviously returned earlier to build up the fire and prepare for her arrival. He carried her belongings inside, while Martha stood in the main room, trying to absorb the reality of her new life. This morning she'd been a widow living alone above her store. Tonight she was a wife again, mistress of a mountain ranch that might be cursed. "I've made dinner," Ezra said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Nothing fancy, beef stew and biscuits." "You cook?" "Had to learn after my first wife died. A man gets tired of burned beans and hardtack." They ate at the kitchen table, making polite conversation about practical matters. When to expect the first serious snow, which neighbors might be willing to help with spring planting, how to market Ezra's furniture in Denver. But underneath the mundane topics, Martha sensed a current of nervous energy from both of them. After dinner, Ezra excused himself to tend the animals while Martha unpacked her belongings. She hung her dresses in the wardrobe of what was now her bedroom, arranged her books on the bedside table, and spread her wedding quilt over the bed. The room felt more like home with her personal touches. When Ezra returned, she was in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. "You don't need to do that," he said. "You've had a long day." "I've been washing dishes for 60 years, Ezra. I'm not about to stop now." He picked up a dish towel and began drying the plates she'd washed. Working together in the quiet kitchen, Martha felt an unexpected sense of rightness about this arrangement. "Thank you," she said as they finished the last of the dishes. "For what?" "For giving me a choice. For not treating me like a helpless old woman who needs to be managed." Ezra studied her face in the lamplight. "Martha, I don't think anyone could manage you if they tried. That's one of the things I admire about you. Heat flooded through Martha's body at his words, a reaction that surprised her with its intensity. She hadn't felt attracted to a man since Samuel's courting days, hadn't thought she was capable of such feelings at her age. I should retire, she said, suddenly flustered. It's been a long day. Of course. Sleep well, Martha. If you need anything in the night, just call out. My room's right down the hall. Martha lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the old house settle around her and the wind whistling through the pines outside. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard what sounded like footsteps on the front porch, but when she looked out her window, she saw nothing but swirling snow. Just the wind, she told herself. Or maybe a deer seeking shelter. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the house, waiting to see if she would become the fourth woman to die at Skull Ridge Ranch. Martha woke to the sound of splitting wood and the rich aroma of coffee brewing. Pale winter sunlight filtered through her bedroom window, revealing a world transformed by overnight snow. She dressed quickly in a practical brown wool dress and sturdy boots, then braided her silver hair into a neat crown around her head. In the kitchen, she found Ezra at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He'd already been up long enough to tend the animals, split kindling, and start breakfast. His efficiency impressed her. Samuel had been a good man, but he'd expected her to handle all the domestic duties. Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood, Ezra said, glancing over his shoulder. I hope the wind didn't keep you awake. I slept fine. Martha moved to the coffee pot, inhaling the rich scent. Though I thought I heard footsteps on the porch around midnight. Ezra's hand stilled on the bacon fork. Footsteps. Probably just the wind or a deer. Old houses make strange sounds. But she noticed how his jaw tightened, how his eyes flicked toward the front windows. He knew something he wasn't telling her. Ezra, about this curse. You said Elizabeth fell down the stairs, Lucy died in a riding accident, and Sarah Jane took fever. Were there any unusual circumstances beforehand? Strange occurrences? He set down the fork and turned to face her fully. All three women complained about feeling watched. Elizabeth claimed someone was walking on the roof at night. Lucy said her horse was spooked by something she couldn't see. And Sarah Jane. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. Sarah Jane swore someone had been in the house while we were in town, moving her things around. Did you believe them? I wanted to think it was their nerves, the isolation getting to them. But after the third death, he shook his head. Either I'm the unluckiest man alive, or something doesn't want women living on this ranch. Martha poured herself coffee and took a thoughtful sip. Well, whatever it is, it hasn't met Martha Blackwood yet. Despite her brave words, Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning. Over the next few days, they fell into a comfortable routine. Martha proved herself invaluable around the ranch, her decades of frontier experience evident in everything she did. She reorganized the root cellar for maximum efficiency, mended clothes with tiny, perfect stitches, and cooked meals that made Ezra groan with pleasure. How did you learn to make bread like this? He asked, breaking open a steaming roll at dinner their third night. Trial and error, mostly. Samuel was particular about his bread. Took me 2 years of marriage to get it right. She smiled at the memory. He was patient, though, ate some terrible loaves without complaining. You loved him very much. It wasn't a question, and Martha appreciated that Ezra didn't seem threatened by her devotion to her first husband. I did. 60 years of marriage teaches you that love isn't just the butterflies and racing hearts of youth. It's choosing each other every day, even when things get hard. Ezra nodded thoughtfully. I never had that. My marriages were arrangements, partnerships at best. I sometimes wonder what it would feel like to be truly chosen. Something in his voice made Martha look up from her plate. In the lamplight, his strong features seemed vulnerable, almost boyish despite his size and age. Everyone deserves to be chosen, Ezra. Their eyes met across the table, and Martha felt that strange flutter in her chest again. At 78, she was apparently not too old for attraction after all. The moment was broken by a loud crash from the front porch. Both of them jumped to their feet, Ezra grabbing his rifle from above the mantel. Stay behind me, he ordered, moving toward the front door. But Martha had lived through Indian raids and outlaw attacks. She wasn't about to cower in the kitchen. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet and followed him to the door. Ezra eased it open, rifle ready. On the porch lay an overturned wooden crate that had been stacked with firewood. The wood was scattered across the porch boards, and snow swirled through the darkness beyond. Wind could have knocked it over, Martha said, though she didn't sound convinced. Ezra stepped onto the porch, scanning the area around the house. The wind's not that strong tonight. As he bent to examine the scattered wood, Martha noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the snow beside the porch steps were footprints, human footprints, far too small to belong to Ezra. Ezra, she whispered, pointing. He followed her gaze and cursed softly. The prints led from the tree line to the porch, then disappeared into the darkness on the other side of the house. Someone was watching us through the window, Martha realized. They must have knocked over the crate when they tried to get away. Ezra's face was grim as he gathered the scattered firewood. This is how it started with the others. Small things at first, sounds, missing items, the feeling of being watched. Then we need to find out who's behind it and why. Martha, maybe you should go back to town until we figure this out. I won't have your death on my conscience. Martha straightened to her full height, eyes flashing. Ezra Blackwood, I didn't marry you to run away at the first sign of trouble. We're partners, remember? That means we faced this together. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Martha was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard horses approaching. She walked around to the front yard to find 3 men dismounting. Her nephew Harold, a thin man in an expensive suit she didn't recognize, and Sheriff Tom Bradley. Ezra emerged from his workshop, wiping wood shavings from his hands. His expression darkened when he saw the visitors. Harold, Martha said coolly, what brings you up the mountain? Her nephew's face was flushed with anger and cold. I've come to talk sense into you, Aunt Martha. This marriage is a mistake, and it's not too late to get it annulled. That's not your decision to make. The thin man stepped forward, removing his hat. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Clarence Whitmore, attorney at law. Your nephew has retained my services regarding some concerns about your mental competency. Martha felt ice form in her veins. My what? Harold believes you're not of sound mind to have entered into this marriage. He's prepared to file papers with the territorial court to have you declared incompetent. Ezra moved to Martha's side, his presence both protective and steadying. On what grounds? Whitmore pulled out a leather folder. Marrying a stranger 30 years your junior, moving to an isolated location known for mysterious deaths, making drastic changes to your living situation without consulting family. These could be seen as evidence of diminished mental capacity. That's the biggest load of horse manure I've ever heard, Martha snapped. I'm 78, not senile. Every decision I've made has been carefully considered. Sheriff Bradley looked uncomfortable. Martha, I've known you for 20 years. You're one of the sharpest people in Clearwater. But Harold's got legal standing as your closest relative. Not anymore, Ezra said quietly. Martha's my wife now. I'm her closest family. Harold's face turned purple. You married her for her money, Blackwood. Everyone knows you're broke, that your ranch is failing. You probably killed those other women yourself. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Martha felt Ezra stiffen beside her, his massive hands clenching into fists. Harold Henley, Martha said, her voice deadly quiet. You've just accused my husband of murder in front of witnesses. I suggest you leave my property immediately before I ask the sheriff to arrest you for slander. This isn't over, Aunt Martha. I won't let this mountain man steal what's rightfully mine. As the 3 men mounted their horses, Whitmore called out, You have 1 week to reconsider, Mrs. Blackwood. After that, we file the competency petition. Martha and Ezra stood in tense silence until the riders disappeared down the mountain trail. Then Martha sank onto the porch steps, suddenly feeling every one of her 78 years. I'm sorry, Ezra said, sitting beside her. I've made things worse for you. Harold's been circling like a vulture since Samuel died. This marriage just gave him a new angle to work. Martha rubbed her temples. But that lawyer seemed expensive. Harold doesn't have that kind of money. Someone's backing him then. Someone who wants this ranch. The question is why. This is good land, but it's not worth murder and legal schemes. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. There might be more to it than just the land, Martha. The Whitmore family owned this property before me. That lawyer who was here, Clarence, he's old Marcus Whitmore's grandson. The original owner? Marcus lost the ranch in a poker game to a cattle baron named Jameson. Jameson sold it to me when he needed quick cash. But the Whitmores never got over losing the family land. Martha felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And if I'm declared incompetent, Harold inherits my property. If something happens to both of us, the land reverts to the territorial government, goes up for auction. The Whitmores could buy it back for a fraction of its value. So the curse isn't supernatural, it's man-made. That evening, Martha insisted on helping Ezra with his furniture work. His workshop was a marvel of organization and craftsmanship, filled with hand tools that had been lovingly maintained over decades. She watched him work on a dining table, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he shaped and smoothed the wood. "You could have been a master craftsman in any city," she said, running her fingers along a perfectly jointed corner. "Why stay out here where it's so isolated?" Ezra set down his plane and looked at her. "After my first wife died, I couldn't face people's pity and questions. This felt like a place where a man could disappear, start over. And the other marriages? Loneliness, mostly. The winters up here are long and dark. A man starts thinking any company is better than being alone." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "But this marriage feels different, Martha. You're here by choice, not desperation. So are you, if you think about it. You could have found another desperate young woman to take care of the domestic work. Instead, you chose a partner." Their eyes met again, and Martha felt that increasingly familiar warmth spreading through her chest. At some point during their week of marriage, her feelings for Ezra had shifted from respect and gratitude to something deeper and more dangerous. "Martha," he said softly, moving closer, "I need you to know, whatever happens with Harold and the lawyers, whatever this curse turns out to be, I'm grateful you took a chance on me." Ezra. Before she could finish the thought, he leaned down and kissed her, not the chaste forehead kiss of their wedding, but a real kiss, soft and questioning and full of promise. Martha's 78-year-old heart hammered against her ribs as she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt front. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "That wasn't part of our arrangement," Martha whispered. "No," Ezra agreed, his thumb brushing her cheek. "It wasn't. Things could get complicated. They already are complicated." Martha stood on her toes and kissed him again, pouring 60 years of buried passion into the connection. When they separated, his green eyes were dark with desire and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like love. "We should go inside," Martha said, her voice husky. "It's getting cold." But as they gathered the tools and prepared to leave the workshop, Martha caught a glimpse of movement in the tree line. Someone was out there again, watching them. This time, instead of fear, she felt anger burning in her chest. "Ezra, hand me that lantern." "What are you, Martha?" "No." But Martha was already striding toward the trees, lantern held high. "I know you're out there," she called into the darkness. "If you have something to say to me, say it to my face." A figure detached itself from the shadows, a woman in a dark coat and hood, her face pale in the lantern light. Martha's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the features. "Sarah Jane Porter," she breathed. The woman who was supposed to be dead stepped into the circle of lantern light, very much alive and absolutely furious. "You need to leave this place," Sarah Jane said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Before they kill you too." "Sarah Jane." Ezra's voice was strangled with shock as he stepped up beside Martha, his rifle forgotten in his hands. "You're supposed to be dead. I buried you myself." The woman laughed bitterly, pushing back her hood to reveal auburn hair and tired blue eyes. "You buried an empty coffin, Ezra. Doc Harrison was in on it. Had to be, to fake the death certificate." Martha's mind raced through the implications. "Someone paid you to disappear." "Who?" "Clarence Whitmore and his associates. They offered me $500 to stage my death and leave the territory. Said if I didn't cooperate, they'd make sure I really did die of pneumonia, the permanent kind." "But why fake your death instead of just leaving?" Martha asked. Sarah Jane's expression grew haunted. "Because dead women tell no tales about what they've seen. And I saw plenty in the months before my supposed death. Men watching the house, going through Ezra's workshop when we were in town, asking questions about the land surveys and mineral rights." "Mineral rights?" Ezra's voice sharpened. "There's copper in these mountains, Ezra. Maybe silver too. The territorial survey found traces last spring, but they kept it quiet while they figured out how to profit from it. The Whitmores have been buying up land options all over the county, but they need this specific ranch to complete their claim. Martha felt the pieces falling into place. And if all the wives died under mysterious circumstances, the ranch would get a reputation for being cursed. Eventually, you'd either sell cheap or die yourself, and the land would go to auction. Elizabeth and Lucy's deaths were real, Sarah Jane continued, her voice heavy with guilt. Accidents, but convenient ones. When I got sick that spring, Clarence approached me, said I could die for real, or take his money and start fresh somewhere else. So you chose to disappear, Ezra said, his voice carefully neutral. I was scared, and I didn't love you enough to die for this land. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not brave like Martha here. Sarah Jane looked at the older woman with something approaching admiration. When I heard you'd married again, I knew I had to warn you. They're planning something bigger than just scaring you away. A chill ran down Martha's spine. What kind of something? I overheard Clarence talking to some men in Denver last week. They're done being subtle. They're planning to burn you out, make it look like an accident. Widow and her elderly husband die in a tragic fire. No one asks too many questions. When Ezra's knuckles were white on his rifle. Soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. They want it done before the competency hearing, so there's no legal complications. Martha's jaw set in determination. Then we need to be ready for them. Martha, no, Ezra said firmly. This has gone far enough. I won't risk your life for a piece of land. This isn't just about land anymore, Ezra. It's about justice. Those men killed Elizabeth and Lucy as surely as if they'd pushed them off a cliff. They terrorized Sarah Jane into faking her death, and now they think they can intimidate us into giving up. She turned to Sarah Jane. How many men? At least 6. Maybe more. They're armed, and they don't plan to leave witnesses. Then we need help. Martha's mind was already working through possibilities. Sarah Jane, can you ride to town? Get Sheriff Bradley and anyone else willing to help. Tom Bradley's honest, Ezra said slowly, but he's just one man, and some of the townspeople might be in Whitmore's pocket. Then we make sure we get the right people. Doc Harrison, if he's really been helping fake deaths, we need him on our side. The blacksmith, Jim Murphy, he's got no love for corrupt lawyers. And there's others who've known me for years, who'll come if I ask. Sarah Jane nodded grimly. I can be back with help by dawn. But what if they come before then? Martha looked at her husband. When had she started thinking of him as truly her husband, and saw the same determination in his eyes that she felt in her heart? Then we hold them off until help arrives. The next few hours passed in tense preparation. Ezra moved through the house like a man preparing for siege, checking windows, loading weapons, positioning furniture to provide cover. Martha found herself falling naturally into the rhythm of preparation, her frontier instincts taking over. You've done this before, Ezra observed as she methodically filled water buckets and gathered medical supplies. Indian raids, mostly, back when I was young. Cattle rustlers a few times. You learn to be ready for anything when you live on the edge of civilization. She paused in her preparations, studying his profile as he reinforced the front door. Ezra, what happens after tonight? Assuming we survive, I mean. He set down his hammer and looked at her. What do you want to happen? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and risk. Martha thought about the kiss they'd shared in the workshop, about the way her heart had started beating differently when he was near. I want to build something real with you, she said honestly. Not just a business arrangement, but a true partnership. A marriage. Ezra crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. This kiss was different from the first, deeper, more urgent, full of the knowledge that they might not live to see another dawn. I love you, Martha Blackwood, he said against her lips. I didn't plan for it, didn't think I was capable of it at my age, but I love you. I love you too, she whispered back, marveling at the truth of it. At 78, I thought I was done with romance. You've proven me wonderfully wrong. They might have said more, but the sound of horses approaching cut through the night air. Ezra immediately moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. For riders, he reported grimly. Armed. This is it. Martha checked the loads in the shotgun Ezra had given her, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She'd fought for her life before. She could do it again. Martha, Ezra said urgently. There's a root cellar behind the house with an outside entrance. You could hide there until this is over. Ezra Blackwood, if you think I'm going to hide in a hole while my husband fights for our home, You've seriously misjudged your wife. Despite the danger, Ezra smiled. I should have known better. The riders stopped in front of the house, and a voice called out, Clarence Whitmore, his cultured tones carrying clearly in the cold air. Blackwood, we know you're in there. Come out, and this doesn't have to get unpleasant. Ezra opened the front door just enough to be heard, keeping the rest of his body behind the solid wood. State your business, Whitmore. My business is reclaiming what belongs to my family. This land was stolen from us, and we're taking it back. Through murder and fraud? Whitmore's laugh was cold. Through whatever means necessary. Your wife is going to have an unfortunate accident, Blackwood. Probably you too. Tragic fire, perhaps. These old houses burn so easily. Martha felt rage build in her chest. These men had killed 2 innocent women and terrorized a third. They'd threatened her husband and plotted to steal their land. Enough was enough. Before Ezra could stop her, Martha strode to the window and threw it open. Clarence Whitmore, she called out. I'm Martha Blackwood, and I'm telling you to get off my property before I put a load of buckshot where you'll feel it most. Mrs. Blackwood, Whitmore replied smoothly. I was hoping we could settle this civilly. Your husband has filled your head with lies about my family's legitimate claim to this land. The only lies I've heard came from you when you threatened to have me declared incompetent. Now you're here with armed men, talking about burning down my house. That doesn't sound very civil to me. Last chance, old woman. Walk away now, and you can live out your remaining years in peace. Martha's response was to level her shotgun at Whitmore's chest. And my last chance offer to you is to turn around and ride back where you came from. I may be 78, but I can still shoot the eye out of a rattlesnake at 50 yards. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Martha could see Whitmore calculating odds, weighing the potential profit against the risk. Finally, he gestured to his men. Burn them out. Make it quick. The attack came from multiple directions at once. 2 men circled toward the back of the house, while the other 2 approached from the front, all of them carrying torches and weapons. Martha and Ezra had positioned themselves to cover both approaches, but they were badly outnumbered. The first torch arced through the air toward the roof, but Ezra's rifle shot caught the thrower in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. Martha's shotgun boomed as one of the men tried to rush the front porch, the blast taking him down with a scream. But more torches followed, and soon the smell of smoke began to drift through the house. The attackers had managed to set fire to the barn and were working on the main house. The roof's caught, Ezra reported grimly, reloading his rifle. We need to get out of here. Not yet, Martha said, her eyes fixed on the approaching riders visible through the smoke. Help's coming. Through the haze, she could see Sheriff Bradley leading a group of mounted men toward the ranch. Sarah Jane had succeeded in her mission, and none too soon. But would they arrive in time? The battle was fierce but brief. Caught between the defenders in the house and the arriving lawmen, Whitmore's men quickly found themselves outgunned and surrounded. Those who weren't wounded threw down their weapons and surrendered. Clarence Whitmore himself tried to escape in the confusion, but Martha's shotgun blast convinced him to reconsider. He sat his horse with his hands raised, his expensive suit torn and his face black with soot. Sheriff, Martha called as the smoke began to clear. I believe you'll find Mr. Whitmore and his associates are wanted for murder, conspiracy, and arson. It took the better part of the night to sort everything out. Doc Harrison, faced with the evidence and Sarah Jane's testimony, confessed to falsifying the death certificate. The surviving attackers, eager to avoid hanging, provided detailed testimony about the Whitmore conspiracy and the murders of Elizabeth Morrison and Lucy Walsh. As dawn broke over the mountains, Martha and Ezra stood surveying the damage. The barn was a total loss, and part of the house roof would need rebuilding. But they were alive, they were together, and the threat that had hung over Skull Ridge Ranch was finally ended. Think the curse is broken? Ezra asked, his arm around Martha's shoulders. I think it never existed, Martha replied. Just greed and evil men who thought they could frighten people into giving up what was theirs. Sarah Jane approached them, her horse saddled and ready for travel. I wanted to thank you before I left, and to apologize for not being braver. You were brave enough when it counted, Martha said firmly. Where will you go? California, maybe. Start fresh somewhere no one knows about Sarah Jane Porter. She looked at Ezra with something like regret. I'm sorry I wasn't the wife you deserved. You were exactly who you needed to be, Ezra replied gently. Take care of yourself, Sarah Jane. As the sun climbed higher, the various lawmen and neighbors began to disperse. Doc Harrison would face charges, but would likely avoid prison in exchange for his testimony. Clarence Whitmore and his surviving conspirators would almost certainly hang. Martha and Ezra found themselves alone on their front porch, watching the morning light paint the mountains gold and purple. The events of the night felt surreal in the peaceful dawn. "So what now, Mrs. Blackwood?" Ezra asked, his voice warm with affection and promise. "Now we rebuild," Martha said practically. "The barn first, then the roof. Come spring, we'll expand the garden and maybe add some fruit trees. Your furniture business should do well once word spreads about the quality of your work." "And us? What about us?" Martha turned in his arms, looking up into his green eyes. "Us, we build too. A real marriage, a true partnership. Love that grows stronger with each passing year. Even though I'm marrying an old woman of 78. Even though I'm marrying a middle-aged man of 52 who thinks he knows everything about everything." Ezra laughed and spun her around on the porch, both of them giddy with relief and love and the simple joy of being alive. When he set her down, his expression grew serious. "Martha, I want you to know, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. Not just because of the partnership or the way you've helped turn this house into a home, but because for the first time, I feel truly chosen. You are chosen, Ezra. Every day, for all the days we have left." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of hammering from the direction of the barn. Looking over, they saw several of their neighbors had returned with tools and lumber, ready to help with the rebuilding. "Looks like we won't be working alone," Martha observed. "Good," Ezra said, his arm tightening around her waist. "A man and woman need community, people to share the good times and the hard times." As they walked hand in hand toward their friends and neighbors, Martha reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 6 months ago, she'd been a widow facing an uncertain future. Now she was a wife again, with a home to rebuild and a love to nurture. The curse of Skull Ridge Ranch was indeed broken, not by supernatural means, but by the simple power of two people choosing to face the world together. And if the mountains themselves seemed to approve, if the wind through the pines sounded like blessing rather than warning, well, that was just the magic that happened when love took root in good soil. 3 months later, on a warm spring morning, Martha stood in her flourishing garden, watching Ezra teach their neighbors' children how to identify different types of wood grain. The new barn was complete, better than the original, and orders for Ezra's furniture were coming in from as far away as Denver. Harold's competency petition had been dismissed with prejudice after the revelations about Clarence Whitmore's conspiracy. The store in town continued to prosper under Emma Cole's management, providing Martha with both income and connection to the community. But the real measure of their success wasn't in buildings or businesses. It was in the contentment Martha felt each morning when she woke beside Ezra, in the way he still kissed her forehead each night before sleep, in the plans they made together for the future. "Mrs. Blackwood," called young Tommy Murphy from the garden gate. "My ma sent me to ask if you need help with the canning this afternoon. Tell your mother I'd be grateful for the help," Martha replied, wiping soil from her hands. "And remind her about the barn dance Saturday night." As the boy ran off, Ezra approached from the workshop with shavings in his hair and satisfaction on his face. "The rocking chair's finished," he announced. "Want to come see?" Martha followed him into the workshop, where a beautiful wooden rocking chair sat gleaming in the afternoon light. The craftsmanship was exquisite, smooth curves, perfect joinery, and a comfort that was evident even at a glance. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her hand along the polished armrest. "Who ordered it?" Ezra's cheeks reddened slightly. "No one. I made it for you. Thought you might like to have it on the front porch for the evenings when we sit and watch the sunset." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. At 78, she thought she was past being surprised by gestures of love, but Ezra continued to prove her wrong. "Help me carry it to the porch?" she asked. They positioned the chair just right, where it would catch the morning sun but be shaded during the heat of the day. Martha settled into it with a sigh of pleasure. It fit her perfectly, as if Ezra had crafted it with her exact measurements in mind. "How did you know?" she asked. "Know what? That this was exactly what I needed. The chair, the marriage, the partnership, all of it." Ezra knelt beside the rocking chair, taking her weathered hands in his scarred ones. "Maybe because it was exactly what I needed too. Sometimes the best things in life come when you stop looking for them and start building something worth having. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Martha rocked gently in her new chair while Ezra sat on the porch steps beside her. The sounds of their thriving ranch surrounded them, chickens settling for the night, horses moving peacefully in the pasture, the distant sound of their neighbor's dinner bell. "Any regrets?" Ezra asked, as he often did during these quiet evening moments. "Just one," Martha replied, and when his eyebrows rose in concern, she smiled. "I regret that it took us so long to find each other." The curse of Skull Ridge Ranch had been broken not by supernatural intervention, but by something far more powerful: the love between two people who'd been brave enough to choose each other when the world told them it was too late for new beginnings. And if their story became legend in the valleys and towns of Wyoming Territory, if people spoke for generations about the 78-year-old widow who broke a deadly curse through sheer determination and the love of a good man, well, that was just the way the best stories were supposed to end. In love, in partnership, and in the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come.